Has there ever been a moment in your life when you realized the story you had been told about yourself was not the whole truth? Not a lie exactly, just a silence so deep and so long that it became its own kind of answer. A silence that said, "Do not ask." A silence that said, "This part of you does not exist anymore." If you have ever felt that the person who was supposed to find you never came looking, this story is for you. Because by the end of what you are about to hear, you will understand why a mother searched for 20 years and still walked away believing her son was dead. And you will understand why that son, a man who had crossed an ocean and built a life on the other side of the world, never stopped watching, never stopped waiting, and never stopped holding a name in his chest like a wound that would not close. This is the story of Lai and the mother he spent 32 years trying to find. It begins not with a reunion. It begins with a lie that was never meant to be a lie, just a desperate choice made by a woman with nothing left in a country that had just been turned inside out, in a year when survival was the only language anyone spoke. To understand what happened between Lai and his mother, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the search, the beginning of the separation. Because those two things are not the same. The separation happened in a single afternoon. The search lasted a lifetime. The year was 1970 or close to it. Vietnam had been at war for so long that the war had stopped feeling like an emergency and started feeling like weather, something you moved through, something you endured, something you planned around. The country was full of women raising children alone, full of children growing up without fathers, full of families scattered across provinces like seeds thrown into wind. Lai's mother was a young woman living in Bien Hoa, in the south. She had made choices that, by the standards of that time and that place, marked her as someone outside the boundaries of what a respectable woman was supposed to be. She had worked at an American military facility. She had a child, Lai, whose father was American. In Vietnamese, people called children like Lai by a word that meant mixed, half foreign, neither one thing nor the other. The word was not always said with cruelty, but it was never said without weight. She was alone. She was poor. She was living in a country where the political ground was shifting beneath everyone's feet, and where a woman in her position had almost no protection and almost no options. She had a mother, Lai's grandmother, a woman the family called Tam Tin, which meant eighth daughter and peaceful, though peace was something that had been a long time absent from her life as well. Tam Tin was a complicated woman. She was someone who had left her home community. Under difficult circumstances, there were debts, there were disputes, there were broken trusts. And she had moved away and started over more than once. She was someone who understood that survival sometimes required doing things that looked wrong from the outside. And when her daughter came to her with a child she could not raise alone, Tam Tin made a decision that she believed, in her way, was practical. She said, "Give me the boy. I will take him down south to your uncle. Your uncle has no children of his own. He will raise him." The uncle was a man known in the family as Uncle Ut, the youngest uncle, by birth order. He lived far down in the Mekong Delta, in the network of waterways and rice paddies and canal roads that made up the province of Houjiang. It was a different world from Bien Hoa, quieter, slower, more rural, the kind of place where a child could grow up without the weight of the city pressing down on him. At least, that was the idea. Lai's mother did not want to give him up. You have to understand that clearly this was not abandonment in the cold, deliberate sense. This was a woman with no money, no husband, no stability, watching her child and knowing that she could not give him what he needed. And her own mother was standing in front of her saying, "I know a way. Let me take him." She said yes. She said yes, and then she watched Tam Tin take Lai south, toward the Delta, toward Uncle Ut, and his childless house, and his boat, and his life on the canals. And then she lost him, not immediately, not all at once, but in the way that poor families in post-war Vietnam lost each other gradually, through distance, through silence, through the collapse of the infrastructure that had held them loosely together. Letters that were never sent, addresses that changed, relatives who moved or died or stopped speaking to each other over old grievances. A country trying to rebuild itself from rubble while the people inside it tried to do the same. By the time Lai's mother tried to go back, to go south, to find him, to see her son, the information she received was devastating. She found her way to the canal road near a landmark locals called the 3,000-meter point, a stretch of waterway in the Delta where Uncle Ut had been known to dock his boat and sell goods. She asked about the boy. She asked about the mixed-race child, the one called Lai, the one who had been brought down from Bien Hoa years before. And the people she spoke to told her, "That boy is dead." They said it plainly. They said he had gotten sick, a severe gastrointestinal illness, the kind that swept through children in the Delta with terrible regularity in those years, the kind that took lives that stronger circumstances might have saved. They said he had died from it. They said it had been 20 years since he was last seen alive. Lai's mother stood on that canal road and heard those words and believed them. What do you do with grief like that grief for a child you gave away, a child you were told you had lost, a child whose death you had no way of confirming and no grave to visit? What do you do with the knowledge that the last decision you made for him was the decision that led to his death? How do you carry that? How do you put it somewhere in your body and still keep moving? She carried it the only way she could. She moved on. She rebuilt what she could of her life. She settled eventually in Long Province, in the part of the South that felt familiar, that felt like ground she knew. She had other children. She grew older. She became a grandmother. She became a great-grandmother. And somewhere inside her, she kept the weight of Lai, the son she had given away, the son she had been told was dead in a place so quiet and so sealed that she did not speak of it often, and when she did, it was in the past tense, because the past was where she had put him. But Lai was not dead. He was alive in the Delta, growing up in exactly the difficult circumstances his mother had hoped to spare him from. Uncle Ut was not a cruel man in the deliberate sense, but he was a hard man, and life on the canals was hard. And the boy who had arrived as a stranger's gift did not always fit comfortably into the life that surrounded him. Lai grew up on the boat. He learned the rhythms of the water, the trading routes across the Delta, the names of the canals and the markets and the towns strung along the waterways of the South. He grew up speaking Vietnamese, eating the food of the Delta, absorbing the cadences and textures of a life lived close to the land and water of Haojiang, but he was also called Lai. Everywhere he went, at the market, on the docks, in the villages along the canal, people looked at him and saw the word on his face before they saw the boy. Mixed, half foreign, not entirely one thing. In a country that had just emerged from a war defined partly by the presence of Americans, being called Lai carried a particular kind of isolation. It was not always hostile, but it was always there. Uncle Ut did eventually make him official papers. The documents said Nguyen Nan Lo, born 1971, though Lai himself had reason to believe he might have been born in 1970, maybe even 1969, and the year had been adjusted to fit someone else's administrative convenience. His age was listed to make him the younger sibling of another child in the household, to smooth out some problem of paperwork or priority. His real birthday, his real beginning was already uncertain, already tampered with, before he was old enough to understand what that meant. He lived with Uncle Ut for years, and then he did not. He left. More than once, he left. The house was difficult. There were beatings. There were too many hard moments between a man who had taken in a child out of family obligation and a child who could feel every day that he was a burden being managed rather than a child being loved. Lai would go walk out, find his way somewhere else, stay with neighbors, work, move, and then circumstances would pull him back, and he would return. He found his way eventually into adulthood. He found his way into trade, buying and selling across the Delta, the same Delta he had grown up on, but now as a young man with his own independence, his own roots, his own small economy. He went to Vinh Long, to Tra Vinh, across the rivers, and into the markets of the western provinces, making himself known, building a name. And somewhere in those years, he learned something, or perhaps he always knew, the way children who grow up without parents always know, at some level, that his story did not begin with Uncle Ut, that there had been a before, that there was a mother somewhere, that the silence around his origins was not an absence of history, but a suppression of it. He asked Uncle Ut about his mother. He asked more than once. He asked what her name was, where she was from, whether she was still alive. And Uncle Ut, whether from shame or from his own complicated relationship with the truth, would not answer. He said he did not know. He said he could not remember. He said the information had been lost. How does a man not know the name of the woman who gave him her child? That question lived in Lai for a long time without an answer. Then came the 1980s, and a program that would change everything for children like him. The American government had begun allowing people of mixed Vietnamese-American heritage, the children born from the war, the ones like Lai, to emigrate to the United States. It was called the Amerasian Homecoming Act in formal language, but in Vietnamese communities, it was understood simply as the program for children of mixed blood, the one that finally said, "You belong somewhere. Come." Uncle Ut made papers for himself and for Lai, and joined the line of families trying to leave. But Lai had a problem. The program required a biological parent to accompany a minor child, and Uncle Ut was not his biological father. There were claims, there were documents, there were local officials who signed papers attesting to relationships that may or may not have been true. And in the end, something fell through. There was a woman, a neighbor, someone who had a legitimate claim through the program, who feared that Lai's presence in the household would complicate her own family's case, and she raised objections, and the objections held. Lai was left behind, or rather, he found another way. He connected with other families, other arrangements, other routes. Through the bureaucracy that the program had created, he left Vietnam on his own terms, through his own connections, with his own papers that listed his name as Nguyen Nan Lo, born 1971, father unknown, mother unknown. He arrived in the United States in 1992. He settled in Boston, in Massachusetts, far from the Delta he had grown up on, far from the canals and the markets and the canal-side villages where people called him Lai. He built a life, he found work. He found a woman he loved, and they married, and they had 2 children. And the children grew up in Vietnam because the family's circumstances kept them there, visiting but not yet together in the same country. He lived in America for 32 years. And for 32 years, through every ordinary day and every quiet night, through every moment of building and working and existing in a country that had taken him in and made him legal but could not make him whole, he carried the question. Where is my mother? What is her name? Is she alive? Did she ever look for me? Does she know that I did not die? He began watching a television program, one of many Vietnamese language shows that dealt with family reunions, with the searching and finding of people separated by war and migration and circumstance. He watched it for years. Every episode was someone else's story, someone else's reunion, someone else's moment of recognition across time. He watched and he hoped and he waited. He eventually appeared on the program himself, spoke his piece, told what he knew, that he had been called Lai, that he had grown up with an uncle in the Delta near a place called the 3,000-meter Canal, that his grandmother's name was Tam Tin, that he was looking for his mother, that he had been looking for 32 years. He did not know if anyone would recognize the details. He did not know if his mother was still alive. He did not know anything, really, only what he felt, which was the particular ache of a person who has spent a lifetime reaching towards something just out of reach. What he did not know was that somewhere in Vietnam, a woman was watching, and when she heard a man on a screen say the name Tam Tin, the name of a grandmother, the name of a woman who had carried a baby boy south along the Delta canals more than 50 years ago, she did not move. She sat very still, and then she picked up the phone. The phone call that changed everything did not begin with tears. It began with caution. That is the thing about hope. When it has been disappointed enough times, it learns to move slowly. It learns to check its footing before it takes the next step. The woman who picked up the phone had lived long enough to know that coincidences exist, that names repeat, that the heart can construct a story out of fragments that turn out to mean nothing. She had also lived long enough to know that some fragments fit together in ways that cannot be explained by coincidence alone. Her name was Haya. She was in her mid-70s, living now in what had become Tay Ninh province, the area that older people still called Long An, the name it had carried for most of her life. She was not well. She had been in an accident some years before, had needed transfusions, had recovered but never fully returned to the woman she had been before. she tired easily. Some days, the tiredness sat on her like something physical, like weight pressing down from the outside. On the day she heard the name Tam Tin, spoken on a screen by a man in America, she had just come back from a doctor's visit. She was exhausted in the particular way that sick people are exhausted, not just in the body, but in the spirit, in the part of a person that manages the daily effort of existing. She sat down, she heard the name, and then she sat very still for a long moment while something inside her rearranged itself. Tam Tin, her mother who had made choices that scattered her family across provinces, who had left one place after debts and disputes and started over somewhere else, who had carried a baby boy, a mixed-race baby, called Lai by everyone around him down into the Delta, and handed him to an uncle who had no children of his own and who had agreed, in the complicated way that poor families agree to things, to take the child in. The details in the man's account were specific. They were not the kind of details you could invent if you were guessing. He said the grandmother's name was Tam Tin. He said the child had been called Lai. He said the uncle had lived somewhere near the 3,000-meter canal in Haojiang. He said he had grown up on a boat, trading across the delta. Nghia knew those details. She knew them because she had lived them not directly, not as a witness to every moment, but as a daughter of that family, as someone who understood the web of relationships and decisions that had surrounded her mother's world. She knew about the child. She knew that her mother had taken a baby south. She knew that the baby had been given to Uncle Ut. And she knew that years later, when someone had gone down to find him, they had been told the boy was dead. She had believed it. For decades, she had believed it. The boy called Lai was dead, dead of illness, dead before he was old enough to remember his own name, dead in a province she had never managed to visit, buried in ground she had never stood on. She had put him in the past tense inside herself, the way you put the dead. She had mourned him in her quiet way and moved forward. And now a man in America was saying he was Lai. She called her nephew. She called her son-in-law. She called the people in her family who knew how to navigate the television program, who could reach out to the producers, who could make the kind of contact that would put her in the same conversation with this man across the ocean. She was not a woman given to dramatic declarations. She did not say, "I have found my son." She said, "I need someone to look into this. I need to know if this is real." The call was arranged. It happened over video, a screen connecting a man in Boston to a woman in a house in what used to be Long On, with a family member sitting beside each of them as support and a program coordinator on the line to guide the conversation. The technology made it possible. The technology also made it strange, this moment that should have been physical, that should have involved hands and breath and the particular smell of a person you have not seen in 50 years, was happening through glass and light and a signal traveling between continents. Lai was in his apartment in Boston when the call connected. He had known it was coming. He had been told that a family had reached out, that there were details that seemed to match. He had prepared himself, or tried to, but you cannot fully prepare yourself for the possibility that the person on the other end of a screen might be your mother. You can tell yourself to stay calm. You can remind yourself that it might not be true. that the details might coincide without connecting. That hope has been wrong before. But the body does not listen to that kind of reason. The body just opens. He saw a woman. Small, slight, older than he had imagined, though why he would have imagined her at any particular age he could not have said. She was someone who had lived a hard life and carried the evidence of it with dignity. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had just come back from somewhere difficult. She looked, several people would later say, like his grandmother, like Tam Tin, like the shape of his own face reflected back through a generation. The coordinator began with the basic questions, the questions that would establish whether the details aligned, whether the story held together, whether this was the kind of connection that warranted moving forward toward a DNA test. The conversation moved through the facts carefully, like hands feeling along a wall in the dark. The grandmother's name, Tam Tin, yes, both of them confirmed it. The nickname came from her birth order. She was the 8th daughter and the character for peace, for quiet. Tam Tin. The name landed in the call like something solid. The child called Lai. Yes. Nghia confirmed that her mother had taken a child called Lai south. Lai confirmed that he had been called that name his entire life, not given another name, not registered under anything else in the community. Just Lai. The name people used when they saw him coming, when they called across the canal, when they did business with him at the market. Lai, the uncle in the Delta, yes. Uncle Ut, the youngest in the family, the one who had no children of his own. His territory was near the 3,000-meter canal in Haojiang, a landmark specific enough that only someone who knew the area could have named it accurately. Lai knew it. He had grown up there. He had fished those waters and traded along those banks and walked those canal paths so many times they were written into his muscle memory. Each point of alignment landed in the conversation like a stone dropping into still water, and with each one, something in the room, in both rooms, on both sides of the ocean shifted. But then Nghia said something that stopped Lai completely. She said that after her mother had taken him south, someone had eventually gone back down to look for him, had gone to the area near the canal, had asked about the boy, and had been told by the people at the market, by the neighbors, by whoever was willing to speak, that the boy called Lai had died, that he had gotten sick, that he had been gone for 20 years. Lai sat with that for a moment. He knew about that illness. He remembered dimly from the years he had spent in the Delta that he had been very sick as a young child, a severe digestive illness, the kind that swept through children in those conditions with terrifying speed. He had survived it. He had not died. But he had been close enough to death that when someone came asking about a sick boy called Lai, the people around him may have simply assumed the worst, or said what they believed to be true, or said what it was easier to say than to go looking for confirmation. And so his mother had gone home believing her son was buried in the ground of Haojiang. He thought about that for a long time after Nghia said it. He thought about his mother, a young woman with no money and no husband, making the devastating journey south to find the child she had given away, asking strangers about a small mixed-race boy, and being told, "He is gone. Do not look anymore. He is already gone." He thought about what that must have cost her. The walk back, the ride back along whatever road she had traveled. The moment when she had to decide what to do with the information, where to put it, how to carry it, how to carry it, how to keep moving when the thing she had hoped for was no longer possible. He felt, sitting in his apartment in Boston, something he had not expected to feel. He had expected grief or joy or the shock of recognition. What he felt instead was a kind of sorrow on her behalf, a retroactive tenderness for the younger version of this woman who had looked for him and been told she was too late. The conversation continued. The details kept aligning. The son of Uncle Lai's adoptive cousin, now nearly 70 years old himself, had been asked about the mother's name and had claimed not to know it. Uncle had died more than a decade ago. He had been 80-some years old when he died, never having told Lai the name of the woman who had given him the child, never having offered any window into those early years. He had simply kept the silence, and the silence had become the shape of everything Lai had not been allowed to know. But Nghia knew. She said, "Your grandmother's name was also written in the official papers as Nguyen Thi Tao, but the name people knew her by, the name she used, was Tin. And there was an aunt, a 9th daughter in the family, who had at some point also been involved in the early days of Lai's care, who had held him, who had helped pass him along the chain of relatives that eventually deposited him with Uncle That aunt had died in 2015, taking her version of the story with her. But before she died, she had told Nghia things. She had confirmed things. She had said there was a boy, and his name was Lai, and he had an older brother also called Lai, also mixed race, and no one knew what had become of either of them. Lai heard this and felt the floor shift. An older brother, also called Lai, he said yes. He said, I know about him. He said that he had grown up knowing, at some remove, that there had been another child, an older one, in the story before him. That this other boy had also been in the family's care at some point, and that he had also eventually emigrated to the United States, and that he had died in America, an accident, people said, some years ago. Both of them dead, Nghia had believed, both of her sons. And yet here was one of them, alive on a screen, in a city she had never visited, speaking Vietnamese with the accent of the Delta he had grown up in. She had been sick. She had come back from the doctor that morning, barely able to hold herself upright. And now she was sitting in front of a camera and discovering that the child she had mourned for 50 years had crossed an ocean and was looking at her through glass. She said, very quietly, that she had watched the reunion program for years, that she had seen other families find each other on that screen, that she had thought, each time, about Lai, about the boy she had been told was dead, and had felt that particular compound grief of wishing and knowing that wishing was useless. And then she heard his name. The coordinator spoke gently. He pointed out that the alignment of details was strong: the grandmother's name, the uncle's location, the canal landmark, the name Lai, the approximate birth year. He said he believed the connection was real. He said the next step was a DNA test samples from both of them, sent to a laboratory to confirm what everything else was already suggesting. Nghia agreed, Lai agreed. They would send samples, they would wait. But sitting in those two rooms, one in Boston and one in the place that used to be Long An, both of them knew that the test was a formality. The heart does not need a laboratory. The heart has its own methods of knowing. Lai looked at the woman on the screen, small, tired, older, alive. He had been looking for her for 32 years. He opened his mouth to say something, and then a voice off camera said, "Tell him to call her mother. Tell him she is right there. She is not somewhere else. She is right there." And then Nghia said something so quietly that the coordinator had to lean in to hear her something about how she had been sick, how she had come from the doctor, how she had not expected this day, how she did not have the strength right now to say everything she wanted to say. And someone in the room with her said, "You do not need strength. Just stay on the call. Just let him see you." She nodded. She looked at the screen, and Lai looked back. And neither of them said the thing that both of them were thinking, which was that the years between them, the 50 years and the ocean and the canal road and the false report of a dead child, had been real, had happened, could not be undone. But there was something else that was also real. And then, just as the coordinator was preparing to close the call and let the family speak privately, Nghia reached for something beside her, something no one on Lai's side of the screen could quite make out, and held it toward the camera. No one could see clearly what she was holding. The image on the screen was small, and Nghia's hands were trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the particular tremor that comes to hands that have worked hard for a long time, hands that have carried things, hands that have reached for things that were not there. Whatever she held it carefully, the way you hold something old, the way you hold something that belongs to someone else. The coordinator asked her gently what it was. She lowered it. She seemed to decide something. She set it beside her instead of showing it, and she shook her head slightly, and she said only, "Later. I will show him later, when we are not on a camera, when it is just us." That was the moment Lai understood, not intellectually, not as a piece of information to be processed, but in the body, in the chest, in the place where the 32 years had lived, that she had been keeping something. That all the time he had been searching, all the time she had believed him dead, there had been something in her possession that connected them, something she had held onto through all of it, through the poverty and the accident and the provinces and the decades of silence. He did not ask what it was. He waited. The coordinator wrapped up the call with the practical details, the DNA samples, the laboratory in Vietnam, the mailing address, the instructions for collecting nail clippings and strands of hair with the root intact, the timeline for results. Everyone spoke with the careful efficiency of people who have learned to keep moving even when the ground beneath them is extraordinary. You make the next appointment. You write down the address. You say goodbye for now, and you close the screen. And then Lai sat alone in his apartment in Boston. Outside, the city moved the way cities move in different, continuous, full of people going about the business of their ordinary lives. Traffic sounds, someone's television through the wall, the particular quality of light in a northern city in a season that was neither warm nor cold, the kind of light that falls through windows and lies flat on the floor without giving much warmth. He had come to America in 1992. He had been, at that point, However old he actually was, 21 or 22, depending on which document you believed, depending on whether Uncle Ut's paperwork reflected any truth about the year he had actually been born. He had arrived with almost nothing. He had arrived with the name Nguyen Nan Lo on his papers and the name Lai in his memory, and no mother and no father, and no clear account of where he had come from or what he was owed by the world. He thought about the canal. He thought about the mornings on Uncle Ut's boat, the smell of the water at dawn, which was different from the smell of the water at midday, cooler and greener, with the mist still sitting on it in layers. He thought about the way the delta looked from the water when you were a child, and everything was enormous. The sky, enormous. The rice paddies, enormous. The world, enormous, and mostly indifferent to you. He thought about standing on the deck of that boat and watching the canal banks pass and knowing, without being able to name it, that he was not entirely where he belonged. He thought about Uncle Ut. It was not a simple thing to think about the man had been difficult, had been hard, had left marks on Lai's childhood that did not fade easily. But Uncle Ut had also, in his own limited way, given Lai something. He had given him the delta. He had given him the knowledge of the waterways, the trading routes, the particular education of someone who grows up doing business with strangers and learns to read people quickly. Those things had served Lai. Those things had made him functional in the world in a way that pure suffering alone does not usually do. He had built a workshop of himself out of whatever materials he had been given, even the difficult ones. He thought about the years of watching the reunion program, sitting in his apartment in Boston, alone, his wife in Vietnam, his children in Vietnam, his life divided across a distance that technology had made manageable, but had never made whole, watching other people find their families on a screen. He had watched for a decade. He had watched hundreds of reunions. He had told himself each time, this might be the episode. This might be the one. And eventually, it was. Not the way he had imagined it. He had imagined, in his private version of the reunion, something immediate, a face he would recognize, a voice that would carry some memory he did not know he had stored. He had imagined the kind of knowing that stories describe, instant, certain, flooding. What he had gotten instead was a careful conversation between strangers who might be family. A coordinator asking questions, details being cross-referenced. A woman across the ocean who was too tired to cry and too honest to pretend. He thought, this is better. Because the thing about the imagined reunion, the one in the stories, the one with the immediate tears and the perfect recognition, is that it papers over the years. It makes the gap seem smaller than it is. It lets everyone pretend that nothing was lost or that what was lost can be fully recovered. But 50 years had passed. A child had grown into a man. A young woman had grown into an old one. They were strangers who shared blood, and that was a real thing, a beautiful and painful and real thing. And it deserved to be approached honestly, without the performance of a feeling that had not had time yet to fully form. The feeling would come. He knew that. It was already coming, slowly, the way water rises, not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, filling every low place. The DNA samples were sent. On Lai's side, he collected what the laboratory had asked for, the nail clippings, the strands of hair with their roots intact, each one wrapped carefully in clean paper, sealed against the moisture and the heat that could degrade them in transit. He had been instructed not to use plastic bags, not to let anything touch anything else, to keep the samples dry. He followed the instructions. With the same careful attention he had given to everything in his life that mattered, the same attention he had given to paperwork for his immigration, to building his small trading business in the Delta, to the slow work of becoming someone in a country that had not asked for him. He wrapped the package himself. He addressed it to the laboratory in Vietnam. He held it for a moment before he took it to the post office, just held it in both hands, feeling its weight, which was almost nothing. A few grams of biological material that carried somewhere inside it the answer to a question he had been asking for 32 years. He thought, this is what I am sending home. On the other side of the ocean. In the house in Tay Ninh, Nghia sat with her daughter and her son-in-law and let them help her collect the samples. Her hands still trembled. They had been trembling since the call, on and off, in the way that the body responds to large emotions when it does not have the energy left to respond any other way. She was still tired. The doctor's visit had not fixed what was wrong with her, had only managed it, had only offered the modest reassurance that she was stable for now, that the years ahead were not certain, but neither were they immediately closed. She thought about the word that the coordinator had used. Coincidence. He had said there was no reason to believe so many details could coincide by coincidence. He had been kind about it, careful about it, but he had also been clear. The grandmother's name, the uncle's location, the canal, the child called Lai, the approximate year these things pointed in one direction. She thought about the moment, years ago, when she had gone south to look for him. She had taken a motorbike taxi, had paid someone to drive her on a Honda along the canal road near the 3,000-meter mark, going slowly, stopping at houses, asking. She had asked at every door she could find. She had asked about a boy called Lai, about a woman who sold medicine, about an uncle with a boat. And at every door the answer had been the same: dead, gone, do not keep looking. She had spent a whole day on that canal road before someone finally told her to go home, that she was asking the same questions and getting the same answers, and it would not change. She had gone home. She had taken the grief with her and found a place for it and kept living, because that is what people do. She had not known, could not have known, that the boy was alive, that he had left that canal road of his own accord, through his own arrangements, had crossed the Pacific, had settled in a cold city she had never seen, that he had watched a program for 10 years hoping she would appear, that he had said her mother's name on a screen, and she had heard it from a sickbed and recognized it like a sound she had not heard since childhood, but had never stopped knowing. She thought about Tam Tin, her mother, the woman who had made the choice that sent Lai south in the first place, a choice made under pressure, under poverty, under the weight of circumstances that gave her almost no good options. Tam Tin had been a complicated woman. She had done things that hurt people. She had also done things that were simply the decisions of a person trying to survive in a world that offered very little room for error. She had taken a baby down to the Delta because she believed the Delta was safer. She had believed she was doing something for the child. She had been wrong about the uncle. She had been wrong, perhaps, about a great many things. But she had also been the one who remembered, who kept the thread, however frayed, however tangled, who made sure that enough of the story survived to be recognized 50 years later. When a man on a screen said her name, Nghia thought, my mother kept something alive, even without meaning to, even through all the damage and the silence and the broken trusts. She kept something alive. She looked at the thing she had set beside her during the video call, the thing she had almost shown Lai, and then decided to save. It was a photograph. Old, creased along the fold lines. The color faded to the particular warmth that old Vietnamese photographs take on a kind of amber sepia, like light seen through very old glass. It was a photograph of a woman holding a baby. The woman was young, younger than Nghia had seen her mother in many years of memory, young, in the way that only photographs can show you, because living people age continuously and you adjust without noticing. But a photograph stops a moment and holds it, and you see. This is what she looked like before. The baby in the photograph was very small. You could not see its face clearly. You could see a blanket, a pair of small hands, a posture of complete trust in the arms that held it. Nghia did not know for certain that the baby was Lai. She did not know when the photograph had been taken, or who had taken it, or what year it represented. But she had found it among her mother's things after Tam Tin died, found it folded into a piece of cloth, tucked into a corner of a box that no one else had opened. And she had kept it. She had kept it through the years, and the moves, and the accident, and the hospital, and the long recovery, through all of it. She had kept it because she could not throw away the possibility that the baby in the photograph was the one she had been told was dead. She decided she would send it to him. She would ask her son-in-law to scan it, make a digital copy, send it through the messaging application that connected their phones, and she would write beside it, simply, I do not know if this is you, but I kept it. The results of the DNA test came back several weeks later. The number on the report, the statistical probability of a biological mother-son relationship, was high enough to be conclusive. The laboratory did not deal in poetry. It dealt in percentages and markers, and the language of genetics, which is a language that does not equivocate. The result said, yes, Lai received the result in Boston. He sat with it for a long time before he called anyone. Then he called his wife in Vietnam. He told her. He heard her voice change, heard the particular sound that someone makes when they receive news they have hoped for, but never fully believed would arrive. She cried a little. He did not quite, but he held the phone against his ear and let her voice be the first sound he heard after the news, because she had waited too, in her way, had watched him carry the question through all the years of their marriage, had understood that there was a part of him that would not fully settle until this was resolved. Then he called the coordinator. Then he called the family in Tay Ninh. Nghia was told by her daughter, who had taken the call first. Her daughter came into the room where she was resting and sat beside her and said, It is confirmed. He is your son. Nghia did not say anything immediately. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked up at the ceiling, which was ordinary plaster, a ceiling fan, a water stain in one corner, that no one had ever quite gotten around to fixing. Ordinary, the ceiling of a room she had sat in hundreds of times, unremarkable, just the ceiling. She looked at it as though she were seeing it for the first time. Her daughter put a hand on her arm. Nghia said very quietly, "I knew, when I heard the name, I knew before anything else. The plans for the actual meeting, the physical meeting, the one that would happen in person, rather than through a screen, were made carefully. Lai would need to arrange time away from work. He would need to coordinate the timing with his wife and children in Haojiang. There were visa considerations. There were family events to navigate. His mother had mentioned a death anniversary coming up, a gathering of relatives, a date that mattered to the family in the way that such dates matter when you are Vietnamese and the dead are kept present in the calendar of the living. He said he would come. He said it simply, without drama, without ceremony, just, "I will come. Tell me the date, and I will be there." And so the arrangements were made. The ticket was purchased. The date was set. 32 years of searching, reduced to a number on a flight itinerary. In the weeks before he left, Lai found himself doing something he had not done in a long time. He found himself thinking about the canal. Not with bitterness, he had made a kind of peace with the canal years ago, with Uncle Ut, with the boat, with the difficult boyhood that the Delta had given him. He thought about it the way you think about a place that shaped you before you had any choice in the matter, with complexity, with something that was not quite gratitude but was adjacent to it. He thought, that place made me someone who could survive this. The canal made me someone who could wait this long without breaking. He packed a small bag. He included, in the pocket of the bag, the photograph that Nghia had sent him, the scanned image, printed out, of a young woman holding a baby whose face you could not quite see. He had printed it on plain paper at a copy shop near his apartment, and the quality was not good, and the image was soft and slightly blurred. He carried it anyway. When the plane landed and he came through the arrivals hall and walked out into the heat of the South, the particular heat of Vietnam, which is not like any other heat, which presses against you immediately and completely and reminds you that you are no longer somewhere you can be anonymous. A group of people was waiting for him. Haya was there. She was smaller than he had expected, though he had known from the screen that she was small. She was leaning slightly on her daughter's arm, not dramatically, not as an invalid, just the way that older people lean sometimes, redistributing weight, navigating the world carefully after it has done what it does to a body over 70-something years. She was wearing a plain blouse, dark trousers, simple shoes. Her hair was pinned back. She looked like what she was, an ordinary woman in her 70s who had come to the airport to meet someone. He walked toward her. She watched him come. She did not move toward him, not yet. She watched him walk across the arrivals hall with the particular stillness of someone who has been still for a very long time and has learned to trust the stillness. When he reached her, he stopped. They looked at each other, up close, without a screen between them, without the mediation of a coordinator or a program or a DNA report. Just two people standing in an airport arrivals hall with the noise of other reunions happening around them. Other embraces, other exclamations, other moments of people finding each other after time apart. She raised her hand. not to embrace him, not yet. She raised her hand and placed it, very lightly, against his face, against his cheek. The way you check whether something is real. The way you confirm, through touch, what your eyes have already told you. He stood very still. Her hand was small and dry and warm, and it trembled slightly, and it stayed where it was for a moment that neither of them counted. Then she lowered it, and he reached into the pocket of his bag and took out the photograph, the soft, blurry printout of a young woman holding a baby, and held it between them without saying anything. She looked at it. She nodded once, slowly. He folded it carefully and put it back in his pocket, close to his body, close to the place where he had kept the question for 32 years. They did not rush. They did not perform. They stood in that airport arrivals hall, and they breathed the same air, and around them the city moved the way cities move, continuous, indifferent, full of people going about the business of their ordinary lives. But inside that ordinary afternoon, something that had been broken for 50 years was, quietly, without announcement, beginning to be held. There is a photograph from that day. In it, Nghia is looking at something just outside the frame. Her expression is not the expression of joy that reunion stories usually show, not the open, flooding relief that makes for clean television. It is something more careful than that. Something more honest. Her eyes are slightly lowered. Her hands are folded in her lap. She looks like a woman who has been given back something she thought was permanently lost, and who is still deciding, still slowly deciding what to do with the having of it. Lai is beside her, slightly turned toward her, not quite looking at the camera. He looks like a man who has arrived somewhere after a very long journey and is not yet ready to put down his bag. Not because he does not trust the place, but because after 32 years of carrying something, you do not immediately know how to stop. Is there someone in your life you have been meaning to reach? Someone you have been putting off? Someone you have told yourself you will contact later, when things calm down, when the timing is better? What would you say if you knew that later was not guaranteed,